Americans for Fair Taxation presents the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation, and recorded by Bob Paxton, a volunteer with the Florida FairTax Educational Association. And now, this week's Chairman's Report.
Hello, I'm Bob Paxton with the AFFT Chairman's Report for Friday, October 4th, 2019. The swamp is worried. Fewer people are itemizing on their income tax. For decades, many taxpayers could obtain some tax benefits by itemizing deductions from their income on Form 1040 Schedule A. The principal deductions taken were for home mortgage interest, charitable deductions, and state and local taxes. If a taxpayer's total deductions exceeded $6,500 for a single filer or $13,000 for a couple filing jointly, they would list these deductions on Schedule A of their 1040 form. This led many of us to feel like we were getting a benefit from the tax code. The truth is that the great majority of taxpayers who listed deductions on Schedule A were often not getting very much in actual tax savings. For example, if a couple filing a joint return had a total of $16,000 worth of deductions, they would list those deductions on Schedule A. This would allow them to reduce their taxable income by $16,000 and not the $13,000 allowed by the standard deduction. This means that itemizing deductions would let them pay income tax on $3,000 less of their total income. Now, if they were in the 20% tax bracket, they would save 20% of that $3,000 or $600 in income taxes. While this is still a benefit, tax preparers often charge additional fees to prepare a more complicated return, making the net savings even less. Now contrast this with a higher income taxpayer in the 35% tax bracket who has $30,000 worth of itemized deductions. For this taxpayer, itemizing deductions rather than taking the standard deduction means he's paying tax on $17,000 less income. His tax savings would be 35% of $17,000, which is $5,950. This is why higher income taxpayers really like being able to complete Schedule A. The rest of us are helping subsidize their higher mortgages, higher charitable contributions, and some of their state and local taxes. In an article for the Tax Foundation entitled "How Many Taxpayers Itemize Under Current Law," Scott Eastman points out that overall, the number of itemizers for 2019 was down from 31.1% of tax filers to 13.7%. The group making $55,000 a year saw the percentage who filled out Schedule A decrease from 21.9% to just 5.3% of these filers. The group making $110,000 a year saw the percentage who itemized decrease from 82% to 50.2%. Now, the only group with essentially no change were people making over $300,000 a year. In that group, the percentage who itemized deductions decreased from 92.1% to 91.5%, a measly 0.6%. Of the approximately 140 million individual income tax returns filed in 2016, only about 22 million reported incomes in excess of $110,000. So it's clear that most of the benefit of itemized deductions is enjoyed by the highest earners. The swamp and the ruling class liked making the rest of us use Schedule A because they could control us by threatening to take away some of our deductions at any time. If the rest of us can now reduce our income tax without having to itemize deductions, then that's a control point that the swamp and the ruling class can no longer use to keep us in line. The swamp and the ruling class are also realizing that making taxpayers less reliant on Schedule A was a mistake because more Americans are not taking the itemized deductions and don't feel like they're getting any real benefit from the income tax. Now, in their defense, the swamp and the ruling class apparently were distracted by the feeding frenzy generated by the vast amounts of money being paid to them to obtain or protect benefits for special interests. Uncharacteristically, they let this benefit for the rest of us slip through. In conclusion, throughout history, the most successful despots were the ones who control their populations in many subtle ways. Now, isn't that what the swamp and the ruling class are doing by threatening to make us pay more taxes? Not by increasing the tax rates, but by eliminating our ability to deduct items that reduce our total taxable income. If we could deduct $4,000 one year and only $2,000 the next year, then our taxes go up by the amount of the tax on that $2,000 we're no longer allowed to deduct. They can then look at us and say, "But we didn't increase the tax rate on you." This tool is gone, and you can see in many of the proposals made by the Democrat candidates for president that they are seeking to put back things into the tax code that would seem to provide benefits for their constituents. Some of these proposals were almost certainly proposed by the swamp and the ruling class. American economist Thomas Sowell said, "The more people who are dependent on government handouts, the more votes the left can depend on for an ever-expanding welfare state." Now, isn't an income tax deduction a kind of a handout? The swamp and the ruling class lost a lot of control over the great majority of us by giving us a higher standard deduction. Now, of course, under the FairTax, all of these games about deductions go away. With the FairTax, there is no income tax. The only tax paid is a simple and fair tax collected when we make retail purchases of new goods and services. It's time for Congress to have some serious discussions about replacing the failing income payroll tax system with the FairTax, the only truly fair tax.
This has been the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation. Check back every week for news and information about the fair tax, and learn why the fair tax should replace our antiquated federal income tax system. If you'd like to receive a copy of the Chairman's Report in your inbox every week, sign up at fairtax.org.